Welcome, everyone. I'm Steve Adubato, and it's our honor to welcome once again Patrick Wall, who is a senior reporter at ChalkBeat Newark. You see him on a regular basis on the terrific NJ Spotlight News, talking about education, a variety of related issues. Patrick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Patrick, I'm reading from an article that you wrote back on March 3rd. You talk about the situation with New Jersey's segregated schools. There's a whole range of education issues, but this is about our schools. Hundreds of thousands of Black and Latino students in New Jersey attend schools where they are racially isolated and surrounded by poverty, despite strong state laws that forbid school segregation. One of the nation's most segregated states, I believe the sixth most segregated state. New Jersey has allowed the problem to fester for decades, and now it must fix it. How the heck could such a diverse state have such segregated schools, A, and B, is there a judge that's now supposed to decide what to do about that, Patrick?
Yeah, I know it's something that I think surprises a lot of New Jerseyans, that the schools are as segregated as they are. You mentioned it's the sixth most segregated for Black students in terms of their exposure to white students, and the seventh most for Latino students. And what the advocates who filed this lawsuit and the parents are claiming is that one of the big reasons this exists is because of state law that requires most students to go to school where they live. And because we know so many communities, suburbs versus cities, are racially isolated, also socioeconomically, then that's imposed on the schools because kids have to go to school where they live. And so That's one of the driving factors. And so that now is the subject of this lawsuit, and a judge heard both sides argue this earlier this month. And so that judge, a Superior Court judge, is expected to rule on this in the coming days or weeks. He said in due course.
So hold on a second. I want to be clear. We're taping on the 15th of March. There's a good chance in a couple of weeks this airs, or after that, a decision will have been made. But the Murphy administration has said consistently in arguing against this lawsuit that's being brought by the plaintiffs, that New Jersey's not to blame for this as a state. So what the heck is the decision? Is it about, it's not whether the schools are segregated, they are. It's who's to blame and what happens.
Yeah, this particular phase of the case is about who is responsible, and specifically whether the state is responsible for fixing the problem. And then if the plaintiffs are successful, then it'll start a new conversation about the remedies. But the state has been arguing, you mentioned it seems pretty evident that schools are segregated. The state is actually saying the plaintiffs haven't proved that this is a problem statewide. They're saying, could it just be some districts and not the whole state? And then they're also saying that maybe it's not the state's fault, maybe it's housing patterns or demographics, which again, the plaintiffs are saying, well, the state rule that you go to school where you live is a state policy. And an earlier court ruling, this is from years ago, they had said that regardless of who's responsible, the state has a duty to act to address segregation because
of the Constitution?
Exactly.
Because the 1947, I'm sorry for interrupting, the 1947 Constitution stipulates that the state will be responsible for a thorough and efficient education of every child in the state, and therefore being segregated or in a segregated school system would mitigate against that. Patrick, is that fair to say?
Yeah, they're saying it kind of deprives students of the benefits of diversity, but New Jersey actually goes a step further, where they do have a clause in the Constitution that says school segregation is not allowed, which makes it one of the very few states in the country that explicitly says school segregation is not permitted.
And to be clear, and I'm no constitutional expert, I'm not a lawyer, but the 1954 decision, Brown versus Board of Education, stipulated the United States Supreme Court that separate but equal doesn't fly.
Exactly.
That's not legitimate. That's unconstitutional. So I just want to be clear on this. I live in the town of Montclair. We have a very integrated community, a very integrated school system. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying what it is. That is the exception. The plaintiffs are arguing that an integrated school system like the one in Montclair is the exception, not the rule.
Yes, generally speaking, that is less common, but they are acknowledging that there are lots of districts that are diverse, and that shows that it is possible. But the big thing they're claiming is that you can't just tell individual districts to do it themselves. Like, for example, Newark, if you just said, okay, Newark, you have to make the schools more integrated. only about 8% of students are white. It just mathematically isn't possible unless you can cross district lines.
Unless kids from Belleville or Bloomfield or Glen Ridge or other communities or Harrison, whatever, could go to Newark and the Newark kids could go. Wow, that is an interesting issue. We'll follow that. Hey, can we shift gears dramatically and talk about charter schools? Help us understand this. I have a little bit of background in charter schools because my dad started the Robert Treat Academy in Newark, one of the first charter schools in the state. My late dad, my sister Teresa was the principal there for many years. I know charter schools fairly well. I also know the Murphy administration has, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're saying, listen, let's call a timeout. Let's not just keep expanding charter schools or having more charter schools or having existing charters expand to high schools or other grades. Why is the administration doing that, A? And B, what are the implications of that?
So what the administration is saying that they have to take a closer look at, first of all, whether the schools actually need more space, because when you do look at the numbers, some of them haven't reached the capacity they're allowed to, so they have kind of seats left over from the previous approval. And then they're also saying that they're questioning whether they're serving students with the greatest needs, which in Newark, it is the case that the charter schools serve fewer students who are still learning English and who have disabilities than the traditional schools.
Hold on, I'm sorry for interrupting, Patrick. Charter schools are public schools, but they're not exactly like public schools because their selection process, and I know at the Robert Treat Academy, there's a lottery, meaning they're different from public schools because public schools take everyone. Charter schools do not. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, they are legally required to accept every student, whatever their needs are. The question is whether families are applying, and some don't apply to these schools because they've heard that they don't have the necessary services for their kids.
Okay, and the Murphy administration is saying, what? Let's slow down the expansion of charter schools?
Yeah, they're saying let's slow down because under the previous governor, Christie, there was a pretty rapid expansion, and Newark was kind of ground zero for that. Today, it went from about 1% a couple of decades ago of students in Newark went to charters to more than 30% today. So it's a huge expansion. And so they're saying, yes, let's slow this down. And I think people might not realize this. The Murphy administration has approved a few expansions, and they've renewed these schools. So they're allowing them to continue to operate. It's not like they're closing schools, but they are in some cases saying, yes, we're going to hold off and giving you more space.
Last topic, and we have Patrick Wall, who you can see on a regular basis. Read his stuff on ChalkBeat Newark, and also check him out on a regular basis on NJ Spotlight News. Real quick before I let you go. Governor Murphy's budget address talked about state funding of public schools. What is the biggest, most significant decision being made or a proposal from the governor on state funding of our public schools? Please, Patrick.
I think the biggest takeaway is just that they're getting a lot more money. He's increasing funding directly to districts by about $650 million this year. Newark is getting the
But some are losing it. Some, like Jersey City, are losing state funding. Go ahead, please.
Some are losing. I think about 180 districts out of the 600 are going to be losing some. So it is true that not all districts are, but I think across the board, most are going to be getting more. And they also are setting aside quite a bit of money for school facilities projects, so to improve buildings and create new ones.
Patrick Wall, I want to thank you for joining us. We'll continue to talk with you because educational issues, particularly the question of learning loss, the question of the emotional and social issues that children have been dealing with 2 years plus into this pandemic, are critically important. Patrick, I want to thank you as always for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
You got it. We'll be right back.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, the Russell Berry Foundation, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, PSC&G, Hackensack Meridian Health, Berkeley College, the Fidelco Group, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and by the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program. Promotional support provided by NJ Biz and by bestofnj.com.
Many of New Jersey's children have been affected by COVID-19, But now that there's a safe and effective vaccine available for children ages 12 and older, you can help make COVID-19 history by getting yourself and your child vaccinated. Let's end this pandemic together and help all children get back to being kids. Visit hackensackmeridianhealth.org/COVID-19 to learn more or to schedule a vaccine appointment today.